and welcome back to my channel. And welcome to another incarnation of palettes I would buy from insert certain brand. I've already done one for Morphe, I've done one for Too Faced, and today we are tackling Urban Decay. Now, for the most part with these videos, I've been talking about brands that I don't purchase a lot from, either because I have issues with the company, I can't trust their quality control. For whatever reason, they're brands that I've sort of either just don't purchase from or companies that I've become a little bit disenchanted with. As of which I'm doing Urban Decay today, but I also thought that maybe the next one I might do might be ColourPop, because let's be real, they release a lot of pointless shiz that deep down in my over-excessive eyeshadow buying heart, I actually kind of want. So I think that would be a fun one to do next. Let me know if y'all would be interested in that, as well as other brands you would like to see me do this video idea with. I feel like for all of us, there are products from companies that we look at and we're like, you know, under different life circumstances, I would be buying this shiz, but, you know, due to the current climate, I'm not. It's sort of just a little bit of self-reflection, getting the shiz off your chest, as it were. So, today we're talking about Urban Decay. I feel like we're being a little bit less, like with the Too Faced one, I was like, revealing the actual basic bish that I am. Whereas this one is sort of like actually admitting the sort of sad, still slightly hoping that Urban Decay does better person that I am. It's like sitting here thinking, maybe this palette, maybe if I buy this palette, this will be the one that makes me feel better about them. This will be the one that pulls them up out of the pit of mediocrity that they've been just digging themselves into. A lot of these companies are just handing out shovels and are like, all right, dig us our hole, dig us the grave. They just ain't even trying anymore at this point. But let us go on without any further ado and talk about the palettes that, you know, if I were just whatever and going on here, that I would purchase or would have purchased, because some of these ain't available no more. So with that, it is a little bit more self-reflection, talking about the past. But before we go into the past, let's discuss something that is a bit more present, and that is going to be the Naked Wild West palette. I believe I've already talked about this palette twice. I most definitely anti-hauled it, and I may have discussed it in a underwhelming makeup products, because in my mind of minds, I feel that Urban Decay could have taken this theme and gone balls to the wall, jacked this theme up to Jesus. And then just like every other company that's doing right now, they just sort of came up with a theme, did the bare minimum, created a slightly correlating color story, slapped that shiz together and put it on the market. I mean, for a company that like had eyeshadow singles, you know, Space Cowboy and all kinds of stuff like that, we could have had such a fantastic aesthetic. But instead we got kind of half-baked, partial Wild West, Midwestern something something. And the sad thing is that for as, you know, underwhelming and for as sad and for as uninspiring as it seems, there was a part of me that looked at this shiz and was like, I haven't bought a Naked palette since fudge. Which was it? Naked Reloaded? Let's see here. The last ones I recall was Naked Reloaded, Naked Cherry, and the Naked Heat. Whichever one came out the most recently, that's the last one I've bought. After that, they just weren't doing it for me. I was sick and tired of seeing these Naked palettes. I was sick and tired of them taking these things that aren't even very related to Naked and neutral or whatever, and being like, we're gonna slap Naked on this shiz because that's the only thing we can do at this point. We are out of ideas. Our creativity has run scarily dry. And so we're gonna take these like kind of nice, slightly interesting colors and put them in a palette that's a Midwestern theme. And people, you look at this shiz, and I gotta admit that I was slightly, like I said, I looked at this and I was like, that's gonna be the Naked palette that I buy. This is going to break the drought of the Naked palettes that I've been passing on. This is the one that is going to make me eat my words and fall all over in love with Urban Decay and the concept of the naked palettes. When in reality, that was probably a little bit of far-fetched thinking. You know, it was like I said when I was talking about Urban Decay in brands that used to be my favorite. There's always this sort of continuous, sad little flicker, glimmer, just a little bit of hope that I'm like, maybe, just maybe, they will make a comeback. They'll be able to find their roots again. They'll be able to shake off the dust of all the really dumb things they've released for the past couple of years, take it back to Urban Decay alternative basics, and just run one over the competition. That hasn't happened. It hasn't happened for like a year and a half, 2 years. So a part of me probably just needs to quit while I'm ahead. This palette was a nice attempt at doing something a little bit different, but it still ended up falling under that category of taking something that doesn't really have anything to do with the naked theme and turning it into a naked palette because currently that's the only thing they're able to do. I mean, I would love to see Urban Decay make a return to color, make a return to substantial releases instead of doing this like naked this, naked that, underwhelming collaborations with an exceptionally iconic musician who was completely done dirty by the travesty of the eyeshadow palettes they created for that shiz. They are on a sinking ship and we are not getting any closer to surviving. It's like all men, women, theys, thems, whatever's for themselves because we're just going down. Then if we're talking about Urban Decay, I mean, I am talking about Urban Decay. Wow, brain just... It's okay, I've had just a little bit of caffeine today and I have just a little bit of shiz I gotta do. But another palette that's sort of an embarrassing admittance, and I have admitted it in a makeup I actually, you know, kind of really wanted, and that is the Naked Ultra Violet, where a little bit more than the Naked Wild West, this was definitely a clinging, a like, just like, maybe this'll be okay, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be alright. Like deep down, I want them to do better. I want them to do good for themselves. So when you see something that's kind of half okay, you're like, okay, all right. We're kind of getting there. We're just kind of gracing just the tip of it, as it were. But unfortunately, once again, we're taking this concept that we've come up with, same with the Wild West one, is we've got this concept that's slightly interesting, could be something, but we're confining it to the little box that is the naked concept. Whereas if they just done a Wild West palette, and like I said, gone balls to the wall with that kind of aesthetic, give us something that's more than just the naked palette format. Like even that is boring, where it's just like, all right, here's another naked palette. There's the lineup, that's it. You know, we're getting the same amount of shades, we're getting the same sort of layout, and like if they'd taken like ultraviolet, and they had taken that shiz and really gone back to their roots and been like, okay, we're gonna do this palette, we're gonna take it out of the naked spectrum, and we're gonna actually create a purple fantasy palette. I feel like purple is really, really in right now. So it would have been a good choice to make, to put something on the market that really speaks to what the brand used to be. And I know that I'm not the only one in this community who looks at Urban Decay and sees sort of a shell of what the company used to be. I mean, they used to be beauty with an edge. You know, they were the ones that were like, we're gonna name our stuff F-bomb and we're gonna name after drugs and all kinds of stuff, and because we're edgy. I mean, Urban Decay was the absolute epitome of an edgelord makeup company. And you know, and there was no ifs and buts or what about it. They just did it. They're like, yeah, you know, we've got F-bomb and we've got shroom and we've got, you know, all these funny, quirky, edgy names to our shiz. And now they're just doing naked over and over and over again without actually branching off into anything interesting. Like I said, they come up with these ideas, and then instead of taking those ideas and allowing themselves to be something on their own, they then take it and force it into the box of a naked palette. And I really think that's one of Urban Decay's failing things right now, is they're unable to really distance themselves from that. They're like, we can't break free from that naked theme. And I understand that's something that's sort of them. That's something that they're known for. But in the same way of Tarte and Tartelette palettes, you know, the Lorac Mega Pro palettes, Too Faced chocolate bar palettes, as much as they are a part of the brand, at some point, that concept does become a little bit tired and repetitive. There's only so much you can do with one theme. And so I saw this ultraviolet thing. I had a little bit of a giggle because I think one of the taglines was like, you know, oh, purples as neutrals. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'm down to live in that universe. But then the purples that they gave us were just, I mean, in the same vein of the Jeffree Star Bloodlust palette, it was just kind of sad. And so I so much would have rather have seen them really, like with the Wild West, with like basically any palette I talk about here, take these themes and actually expound on them and do something with them more than keeping them locked up in the old Urban Decay that's still trying to vie for some amount of relevance in this just over super saturated market where there's so many other companies doing things that Urban Decay used to do and now doing them better. That is a theme that I have found to be absolutely just Too Faced and all these other mainstream brands that used to be the end-all be-all. Absolutely everything just aren't doing it like they used to. They ain't keeping up with the times. So I would have really loved it if they'd just been like, all right, we're going to make an ultraviolet palette, not make an naked ultraviolet, not make a naked Wild West. Just give me a Wild West palette and give me an ultraviolet palette and then give me a blush palette for the ultraviolet collection that has hues of purple and fuchsia and magenta, and I would be all kinds of happy. But they not. They're giving me the naked ultraviolet, so I'm not all kinds of happy, but there was still a part of me that would have been like, I was so tempted. I was just like, it's that theme again, where when a company keeps releasing really boring shiz, really mediocre products, when you see something that is then slightly interesting, not really anything amazing, but in comparison to what they usually release, you're like, oh, wow, they're actually trying a little bit today. But it's still not enough to make me want to buy it, but it's enough to give me that, yeah, I would like to. Okay, now let's take it a little bit back in history to a palette that, I mean, when it comes to makeup timelines, I go through trend mood sometimes and I'm like, whoa, that happened like then? And one of those things is the Back Talk palette. This was a palette they released 4 to 5 years ago, maybe, I don't know. I'm old, and when it comes to remembering when products were released compared to other products, I just have a hard time keeping it straight. Like, I'll see something and I'll be like, wow, that was last year? No, that had to be 3 years ago, not last year. And this was a palette that really appealed to me aesthetically as well as color-wise. This was sort of like a plummy, reddy, rosy, mauve-y palette. This was when, if I can recall correctly, I believe the Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance was really freaking popular, and so a lot of other companies were releasing these reddy, rosy, you know, those kind of tones in their palettes. Now, one thing that this palette had going for it, which we're also going to talk about as being something that was a detriment to the palette, but Urban Decay tried to make you think that one thing it had going for it is you had the palette and you opened that shiz up and it had a row of blushes. If y'all know, your girl loves blush. Your girl loves, you know, give me blushes in like a face palette format, F me up. And these blushes were all sorts of pretty because we're rosy, we're reddy, you know, we're mauvey, we're plummy. You know, I was ready to have that shiz all up on my face. However, with addition to having eyeshadows and having blush, you know, I am not a big fan of things that kind of, I don't like palettes that have eyeshadow and face products in it or lip products. I don't live for the cross-contamination. Maybe it's because I'm too simple-minded. I'm like, I like to know where it goes. I don't want to be like, okay, do I put it in my blush drawer? Do I put it in my eyeshadow drawer? Where does it go? Do I have a drawer just for these hybrid chimera alchemy things? So we had all that to deal with. And then sort of on top of that, the icing on the cake, the cherry on the cake ice cream. The cherry on top of this eyeshadow palette was the fact that you could take the blush palette out of it. And if I recall, this has been a while since I've talked about this shiz, you just took it out. The blushes were just sort of free range. You know, it wasn't a second palette that you could be like, all right, I'm going to close this and put it in my blush drawer. It was just, we've got an eyeshadow palette with a section of blushes that you can then take out. I would have much preferred if they were like, once again, we've got this back talk idea. Let's take this and give me, okay, just a minute. I'll be right back. This here is currently the only Urban Decay palette I have left. This is the Naked Heat. I'm going to be pulling this into a rotation to use it. But Urban Decay, all right, I am really tired of you doing this same layout. They're like, what are we going to do? How are we going to interest the people? We're going to make some rectangular shades in a rectangular shaped palette. Now, y'all know I'm not a huge fan of big, bulky, ostentatious palettes. I am looking at you, Jeffree Star. But at the same time, you get kind of tired of seeing the same rectangular packaging with rectangular shaped eyeshadows going in one line. And part of what makes that very unintriguing to me is the Back Talk palette. I feel like this is when Urban Decay sort of really started to slip. They were like, okay, all right, we got to come up with something. What are we going to do? And they really lost the ability to create color stories that had a lot of depth and intrigue. They were just sort of kind of had an okay gradation. Typically, they didn't have a lot of mattes, and the mattes that they did have, they had like a lot of, like, we've got these two ones right here that are super similar, these ones right here that aren't, you know, a lot different from each other, these two right here, you know, there wasn't a lot to do with even the amount of shades that they gave you. You know, I would love to see for them to kind of abandon this format and give us something that has a lot more room for color depth. I think it would be better for them to do that instead of just sticking to the same tired and like not even tried and true. You know, at this point, it's just doing the same thing over and over again and beating a dead horse. Because if you think about it, you know, we've got the Naked palettes, we've got the Back Talk palette, we've got the Urban Decay JeanMichel Basquiat, which were once again straight up and down or straight across rectangles. We had the, I think it was summer 2017. It was a while ago. I'll insert a picture, you know, and all that jazz. You know, once again, straight up and down rectangles. Maybe this is just me. Maybe this, I mean, probably is just me, let's be real here. But I like a company that stays true to itself while still being able to do things different, you know, where palettes are still differentiated. And I think part of the issue I have with the layouts are because Urban Decay has been really struggling to create color stories that do have that inclusive depth where it's going to work for a myriad of people, not just someone who's pasty, but someone who's pasty down to the deep, dark, delicious melanin. And if there's one thing I've learned in my makeup purchasing journey is that a lot of companies don't really focus on a healthy level of inclusivity. And that's got a lot of issues in and of itself. I mean, we've talked about these palettes. Let's talk about a palette I would buy that isn't in this format. This was, again, a palette I saw and a part of me was like, hello, what you doing? I could review you. I remember there was a lot of interest and intrigue in this palette because I think it was one of the most interesting things that Urban Decay had done in a while. And so to see them kind of almost return to their roots was really refreshing. And that is the Elements palette, which a part of me kind of regrets not getting because looking back on it, I mean, I regret not getting it for a dumb reason, but looking back on it, I'm like, girl, what? That shiz is your aesthetic. Look at that shiz. That's got all the stars and the astrology and all that shiz up in here. I mean, I think part of why I didn't buy it because it's a circle, which I'm sitting here complaining about them doing straight up and down. At the same time, they do a circle. I'm like, but I don't want to have to I don't want to store that. But this palette also actually had really, really pretty packaging. It had colors that were interesting and a little bit different than kind of just doing all the naked nonsense. I think potentially one of my reasons for not purchasing it, obviously this was a while ago, is due to the fact that I'm pretty sure it had a lot of shimmers in it. There was also, I believe, the slight agita I had. I think the circles were different sizes, which I think is totally hysterical because I just went on that rant being all like, well, they're dumb for doing the same format. And now we're talking about a palette that's in a very different format. And I'm like, well, this is stupid. I guess I'm just really picky about how I like my palettes to be shaped. But looking back on this and looking at the color story and thinking, you know, I actually think that if I had purchased this, it would have been something that I would have gotten joy out of. Like, for example, I've decluttered my Naked Reloaded. I've decluttered, I mean, everything except for freaking the Naked Heat. And all of those were kind of things that I bought that I was like, yeah, sure, okay, whatever. Whereas with the Elements palette, I think it had enough interesting color story to it that really would have, you know, would have been something that I wouldn't have bought and then it just sat there and then just decluttered it. I think it had enough things going for it where it would have actually been something I enjoyed. And ultimately, because of the beautiful aesthetic that it had, it at least would have been something that I would have displayed somehow. Sort of in the way of displaying, I'm actually kind of slowly working through a declutter and fitting everything in those things. And my KVD Mi Vida Loca Remix palette has gone from living in the eyeshadow drawer to being decoration now because I think it's reached a ripe old age where I don't want to put those pigments anywhere near my eyes. But back to the Urban Decay Elements palette. It's funny because I didn't buy the palette. I believe Lacey from Spooky Lips and Fat Hips, I think she really enjoyed it. There are a couple people that said it was actually pretty good. I did buy the travesty of a little highlighter that came out with that palette, decluttered that. It was a product that I definitely regret buying. It was awful. And in all honesty, I think if I had gone in on the palette, I would have been a bit less disappointed than me just being like, oh, well, I'll just buy the highlighter. Okay, so the next one, which is going to be the last one for this video, maybe I hesitate to use the word controversial. It's just, you know, we're talking about the Urban Decay JeanMichel Basquiat collection, which I have talked about in a fair amount of depth in varying videos on my channel. I've anti-hauled it. I've talked about it being underwhelming. I've talked about it being a collection we didn't ask for. And I must admit, I had a lot of issues with this collection when it came out. One thing being that, for those of you who don't know, JeanMichel Basquiat is a very well-known graffiti-style artist who really made a mark on not so much like the pop culture art, but with his strong, striking graphic style that really grabbed you and told a story in such a simple yet graphic way. And so they did this collection, and in the campaign and all the pretty pictures, they didn't have anyone of color. They did not have anyone showcase that have the deep, dark, delicious melanin. And when you're making a collaboration that is based on an artist who has the deep, dark, delicious melanin, I mean, that's a problem. And there was a part of me that still wanted this so bad. I loved the art. I loved, you know, the color stories. I was really vibing. I wanted the neutral one. I mean, I wanted both of the eyeshadow. I wanted the neutral one and the bright one. I wanted the blush palette. I mean, basically, if it was a palette in this collection, internally, I really wanted it. And a part of me almost kind of justified it by being all like, oh, well, I'll get it. Now I'll display the packaging as art. Because a lot of people did that because they took his art and they imposed it onto the packaging. And so some people were buying this. They're like, oh, I'm buying it because because of the art and I'm using, you know, the colors, and they're like, well, if I end up, you know, not liking the eyeshadow, I can just display it. There are a lot of declutters that were like, I don't use this. I'm not going to declutter it though. I'm going to like hang it somewhere in my house. And I'm like, that's, you know, all well and good, but you know, it kind of boiled down to, I'm like, all right, I could spend, you know, what, 30 or 40 something on these palettes and be all like, well, it's got JeanMichel Basquiat art on it. And when in reality, I could just take that money and not give it to a company for coming up with a marketing niche thing. And I could actually purchase, you know, prints of his art. I could, you know, use that money and go to a gallery and actually view his art rather than giving my money to a company for doing the bare minimum when it comes to these collaborations that honestly should have a bit more respect to them, in my opinion. I honestly have issues with Urban Decay really being a company that takes these wonderful artists of color and waits for them to die and then decide to do collaborations. I think it is a dirty marketing technique. I think it's poorly thought out. I think to a certain degree, depending on how they do it, it's tasteless. I think there are better ways to tribute a artist or any person than taking their things, putting it on makeup and selling it to us. And I understand that is just part of the market. That is just part of this whole thing. There are plenty of licensed and collaborations. We know this, but I feel some things are better left to other artistic avenues. And then you have the fact that Urban Decay, you know, we didn't have any wonderful people of color in the ad campaigns, and we didn't have any discussion of, you know, his struggles and, you know, what he went through for his art and with his art and how it impacted him and his life and how it ultimately ended. You know, it was just sort of a, oh, look, here's his art. We're gonna put it on our eyeshadow packaging because we're quirky and we're edgy. I mean, you can be quirky and edgy and all you want, but that doesn't mean you got taste. There were really good things about the quality and stuff like that, but it just, I understand. I talked about this before and I had some people say that they think that some white people were sort of taking it a little bit too far and sort of like white knighting and stuff like that. I mean, it's just my own personal morals and ethics where I think that Urban Decay, especially doing these things, they do it because they think it's edgy, they do it because they think it's aesthetic, rather than doing it as a really actually thought out, you know, tribute to these people. They're just like, let's take their shiz, put it on some, you know, eyeshadow, on some blush. We'll call it a collection. And because it's all artistic and artsy fartsy, it's going to work with our I'm just like, I'm really tired of socially irresponsible collaborations because they think it's going to make them money because it's a marketing technique. I've talked about licensed cash grabs. I've talked about collaborations. You know, they know what they're doing. But I feel like as a company, they're just not doing it in what could be, like I said, they could do so much good with it. Raise awareness, you know, talk about all these things. But instead, I mean, I understand I'm going to have someone down below that's like, well, they're just a makeup company and they're just doing their thing. You know, they're supposed to make makeup. They're not supposed to be socially responsible. When you take people who are as iconic and who are as made as significant of an impact as Jean-Michel Basquiat and Prince, it then behooves you to treat that sociably responsibly and give these people the respect that they deserve, especially that they are passed. Like, that's even more. It's like, let's make money on a dead person. It's a thing with me. Okay, that went a little left field. That was a little bit like less talking about palettes that I would buy and more let's talk about all the problematic issues with Urban Decay. At least in my mind. Obviously, I'm not the end-all be-all person on YouTube. Go watch other people, man. But I would love to hear what y'all have to say about the products I talked about. You know, is there an Urban Decay palette that you would buy, or is there a palette from a company that you would buy if you had more faith in the company? But thank you guys so much for watching. I love you, and as always, keep it real. Mwah!